Hey everybody, welcome back to Munro Live. I'm here with Scott and we're going to take a little look at the differences between the old Rivian quad motor system and the new dual system which they developed themselves. So
definitely excited to dive into this, and yeah, first off, it was just exciting to get this in here. I know, thanks to the Rivian team for sending it over to make it available. We were eager to tear it down and look through it, and yeah, today we're going to do a bit of a comparison. One thing, I guess, just at a high level to clarify, we'll say quad motor and dual motor. When we're saying that, we're really talking about the total in-vehicle quantity.
Right,
so
exactly.
The quad motor one, a single drive unit from that, what we've got over here is just the rear drive unit. So that actually has 2 of the 4 motors. So it's really a dual motor unit. And then a single one from the other vehicle that in total has 2. So it's a little bit confusing, but essentially 2 motors here, 1 motor here. You multiply that times 2 in the vehicle for total quantity.
So again, I have to thank the guys over at Rivian for giving us a motor and drive system, and that was very generous of them. And for those of you who didn't see it, there's an RJ and I, what do you call it, podcast that that you can come in and there's you can hear what RJ had to say. He's very, very knowledgeable about his products, which is very unusual for a lot of CEOs. So let's dive in.
Sure.
So let's start over here at the Stators and and look at what we got.
Absolutely. Sandy, I know this was something that jumped out to you. And like, again, I said, so we've got old here, new here. We'll kind of juxtapose between the major systems that we're going through here. Stator's obviously part of the electric motor. It's the stationary element. We've got the 2 stators from the old one here. Sandy, what are we seeing here and how does that compare to this?
You can see that this one had the crown cut off. You can see here though that the crown on this side has been laser welded together and then capped. If you look at the Rivian, you can see that on this side, the crown here, this is all made with hairpins. These are sometimes called hairpins, other times they're called eye pins.
Yeah.
But you've got twice as much welding on the Bosch. And by the way, we should differentiate.
Yeah.
This is a Rivian design, this is a Bosch design. And everything that you see here is from Bosch. Rivian did really nothing except buy a black box for this. And I guess I'm happy to see them move in a new direction.
Yeah.
This episode of Munro Live is brought to you by Brilliant. Here at Munro, we love to get technical. Our engineers are lifelong learners and are constantly looking for opportunities to hone their skills, which is why we love Brilliant. Brilliant's mission is to inspire and develop people to achieve their goals in STEM. Brilliant knows that thousands of dollars spent on education isn't always attainable, so they offer courses in math, science, and technology for a fraction of the price in a format that allows you to learn on your own time. Whether you're interested in learning the basics to deepen your understanding while watching our teardowns, or you're looking to level up your skills at work, Brilliant customizes lessons to fit your needs, so you can learn at your own pace. With Brilliant's interactive approach, you can master large concepts in as little as 15 minutes per day. Here at Munro, our team's skills are more than just basic engineering. Adding on lessons and foundational logic helps improve problem-solving skills, which is essential for our lean design methodology. Whatever your goals are, you can get started on Brilliant right away with 30 days free. Plus, you can get 20% off your annual plan by visiting brilliant.org/MunroLive or by clicking the link below. Only the first 200 people will be able to claim this special deal, so act fast and get started on your customized learning path.
And interestingly, so seeing this quantity of welds, we have seen motors that look like this before with the Stator. I know some of the early GM stuff had that. This is not groundbreaking in the sense that we do see, I know like on the Lightning and other vehicles, it's probably more common to see it with the welds on one side. But just as evidence, I think we're going to see a trend here. We like the direction that Rivian's moving in from the old to the new. This is definitely more efficient from a processing perspective. A lot fewer welds, less cost.
Less cost when you go with a true hairpin. And by the way, this the hairpin design was invented by General Motors. They were leading the way in electrification for a long time, and then of course EV1 and whatever they went in a different direction. But if we look at the Rivian design, this is similar, much more similar to the Ford design, except for one thing. They've splayed out the hairpins, which allows you to basically make a smaller package for one thing, but it also tightens up the joint between the hairpins and the interconnecting surfaces that are going through the electric motor. So everything about this looks quite good.
Yeah, and even so, the stator, this lives in a housing. You can see on the old unit, this was an extruded aluminum sort of cut to size housing. Makes sense because it was a Bosch unit that was sort of cut to size off the shelf. This is cheap and it's modular, but as a long-term solution, this case and this housing that contained the stator was a lot of separate castings and extrusions that bolted together. On the newer unit, they've gone more in line with what other folks tend to do when they're building a bespoke unit that's purpose-built. They've got a single cast aluminum housing with an end cap, and this is getting bolted within it. So we're seeing, in true lean design methodology, right? Fewer parts coming in, shrink wrapping it. Again, like the direction they're moving here, not like earth-shattering, but definitely more competitive and definitely the right direction.
Well, the idea behind the Bosch unit is they'll sell to anybody.
Yeah.
And it's made for everybody, so that means that it's not perfect for anybody. So what we're looking at here is the guys over at Rivian designing their product to suit their vehicle. They're not beholden to anybody anymore. So I'm looking forward to seeing the quad coming out like this in the not too distant future.
Yeah. Another big thing while we're looking at this, and this will kind of transition to another topic, but that is the cooling system and cooling strategy they're using here. So big difference between the old unit and the new was in the previous units, they were using ethylene glycol and water, so coolant that they were passing through the jackets on the stator. So these little...
The housing, yeah.
Yeah, on the stator housing. They were passing coolant through here to try and take heat out of these copper conductor bars that are in the stator. By contrast, on the new unit, they've went from glycol cooling to a pressurized oil-cooled system, which is in line with what we see on other sort of high-performance competitors, specifically Tesla. They've always done that, right? And what that allows them to do is instead of passing things through jackets that are close to the conductors, they're actually able to put oil directly onto their electric motor components. So they're going to dribble oil onto the stator windings. They're going to pass it actually into the rotor as well. And they're going to bathe this whole rotating assembly on this side of the case is going to be immersed in oil. And I know, Sandy, we were talking earlier, oil versus glycol, there's a reason that you can't bathe an electric motor in glycol, right?
Well, even with standard oils, you can't do it. So these are the types of oils that you find inside of those transformers outside your house. They're sitting in a bath of oil. That oil does not conduct electrically. And so consequently what happens is you get the cooling, but you don't have to worry about a lot of other things like blowing up the transformer and whatnot. So this is one of the splash units that goes into the Rivian unit, and it sits basically like that. Not necessarily here, but in the housing. But it's going like that, and it's just bathing the outside edge, and I can't remember which end's which, but I think it's this way.
Yeah, there's actually one on both sides, and this plugs into a jacket here, and essentially it's going to pass oil from that side through, and these are little nozzles that are going to spray jets of oil down onto here, which is a source for sure of heat when you're using this.
And this is very, very similar to the types of units that we put into an ICE engine as well. Normally what you do is you're kind of like trying to bathe the components inside of a ICE engine in oil to keep them from seizing up. So let's have a look at the other part of this equation. So I like this for a whole bunch of reasons, and
My apologies.
try not to hurt yourself. Not on camera anyway. So anyways, I like this for a couple of reasons, and I'm going to talk about one, and then we'll talk about the real or Scott can talk about the real business end. So I want you to have a look at this cool idea here. So look at how this is bumped out here and bumped out there. This allows me to drill in one side, keeping my sealing surfaces nice and flat, and I drill into this other boss here, and now what I can do is I can plug that end and I can squirt in this end, and then it comes along this path and comes out. This is kind of clever design. I like clever design. Personally, I wouldn't have done it this way. I would have had a cast in place pipe, but This is still a really nice idea. So
Yeah.
why don't you tell us how it works?
Yeah, and so essentially this is called the resolver cover, resolver housing. This goes on the far side of the case, and this basically, there's an end cap that closes out the side of the gearbox unit here. This is where the rotor and stator lives. This goes on the end cap, and what this essentially is, this shaft here, you can see there are small holes in it that again are going to be used as jets to push oil through to cool and take heat out of these motor components. So when that's installed, this actually goes into the rotor and seals in there. So again, in an electric motor, you're generating heat in the stator and in the rotor. This is coming in, they're passing oil through this and taking heat from the rotor itself. Whereas again, on the previous unit, they were taking it only from the perimeter. And interestingly, I remember the first vehicle that I saw doing cooling internal to the rotor was actually, I think it was 2016, Tesla Model X was doing that. They've since kind of changed up a little bit of that, but they've always been doing pressurized oil cooling. And one thing I would say, they were talking about the pros and cons and trade-offs. So a pressurized oil system is a more expensive cooling system, but what it allows you to do is, from a performance perspective, you can get more out of your motor.
Yeah.
So in the path to going from 2 motors to 1 motor, they're able to get away with, a unit. It's not double the size of the others. It's somewhere in between, maybe 150%, but they're able to push this unit and achieve more with it because they've chosen to spend a little bit more money on a superior form of thermal management, essentially, right?
So let's move on to the disconnect here.
Yeah.
Seeing it sitting right in front of you.
Yeah. So this is another big deal on this unit. When they had 2 motors, the drivetrain was unique in that it was independent wheel control and there was no differential connecting the 2 sides. When going to a single motor that's going to be on an axle, they now have to have a differential between the 2 sides, meaning that they're linked because there's only one motor that's going to drive both wheels. So in the name of efficiency, something that existed on the previous unit was they had disconnect units, but they had to have 2 of them, and they were mounted external to the gearbox. On this unit, they've now brought the disconnect unit and integrated it into the gear train. So I can kind of show you how this works. Essentially, they've got a series of components inside of the ring gear here. This is a spring washer, a helical washer. This drops in, and you've got a component, tooth drive gear here that drops in, and you've got an electromagnet inside of this unit. And this, when they apply current to it, this ring can shift in or out. Yeah, it's kind of, oh, there we go. So it just moves in and out slightly, and what that's gonna do, the spring keeps pressure, but whether it's in or out, it's going to basically allow this unit to freewheel and allow you to spin your wheels without putting drag back on the electric motor and getting those back electromotive forces that are a source of efficiency loss in an EV. So, in contrast, what they had on the previous unit, they had to have 2. They were these sort of bolt-on units. Means was the company, Means Industrial, that did them. Got some of the components over there, but essentially, because you had 2 motors and independent wheel control, and I'll show that component here, you had to have 2 units. So they've gone from 2 to 1, right? True lean design principles. This was the old unit. Essentially, you had one of these on either side of the gearbox. It bolted on at the point between the output of the gearbox and where the half shaft came in. These were actuated still with an electromagnet, so that had the ring. So actuated in a similar fashion, but with these, it was a dog clutch that had little toggles that flipped and mated with the pieces in here. And I know we reviewed that in an earlier video. Essentially though, you went from 2 to 1, and that's consistent with a trend. The whole reason you have a disconnect unit, we've seen Hyundai do this. They're claiming drivetrain efficiencies of 6 to 7%, which might not sound like a lot to people, but in an EV, efficiency is the name of the game, right? And so having something like a disconnect unit that reduces drag on your permanent magnet powertrain, what that allows you to do is achieve the same things with fewer kilowatt hours in the battery pack. And at the end of the day, your batteries are still your most expensive component in the vehicle. So to the extent that you can limit the number and the quantity of those, you're doing yourself a favor. So
Again,
you spend a few $100 and you save more than a few $100 essentially, right?
So again, there's 4 things that you want to try and look at always for efficiency, if you like, in a vehicle. Or range, I guess, is the better way. Efficiency is one of them. And the efficiency can come about with mechanical things like this, or weight is the second thing, or your aero is another thing that you want to get through. And then there's one more that people kind of forget, and that is friction. So if we take a look at all the friction devices in the old system versus the new system, you're looking at a significant difference. And like I say, maybe 6% for that, that's one thing. But at the end of the day, I think that there's a ton of less friction going on here. And I think some of that has to do with the fact that they're actually using oil. So this oil, like I say, is for cooling, and it's non-conductive, but it's still slick. And that helps out in some cases.
Yeah.
Sometimes you want an air bearing, which is kind of like what you've got in a normal, like this one. But occasionally it's not so bad to have something where you've got lubrication for other things that are going on inside, in this case, the engine and gearbox. So let's swing over and have a look at some of the electronic stuff.
Yep. So when we say electronics on a drive unit, we refer to a 3-in-1 unit, the 3 main components. You've got the electric motor, you've got the gear train, and you've got the inverter. The inverter is the electronic brains of it. It's what's taking the DC power from your battery and converting it to 3-phase AC power that's going to your electric motor. Here we've got the new inverter setup, and here we had the old one. I guess at a high level, important again to note that this was essentially 2 inverters packed into one housing because there were 2 separate motors versus just a single unit here. And I know, Sandy, I know there's some things you want to point out. To me, one of the things that jumped out right off the bat, this inverter, the way that it is integrated to the drive unit, is much more like what we've seen from others. Yeah, like Tesla, Ford, we've seen others do it, but essentially you've got the guts of the inverter are getting mounted onto the drive unit and sealed, and there's just one side essentially, right? You've got a cast housing with a machine surface and a seal, and it goes to that. They're able to do what they need. The inverter on the previous unit was sort of its own separate fully enclosed monument where you had a lower portion and then you had an upper that went onto it. So again, like moving in the right direction, we're just seeing fewer components, right? The lid is gone. They essentially flipped it upside down and they found a way to work it into the cast case. Now it was a little difficult because the packaging here was with the motor, so I kind of understand why it is shaped like this, but again, that's what you want to see. That's competitive. I'm still not sure why it's painted black. You don't see many cast aluminum housings that are.
We actually asked about that. I didn't get an answer. I don't have any reason to want to paint this at all. It's made out of aluminum. It doesn't need paint, that's for sure. We thought maybe it had something to do with, I don't know, RF, but I mean, look at the thickness. I mean, this is a fairly thick component. There's no way that you're going to get any feedback or any. I really don't understand it.
Yeah,
I wouldn't do it. I know that.
Without knowing, like, and it could be that it's a coating. There are some things you can do maybe for EMI or electromagnetic interference.
Yeah.
It could be some sort of isolation.
Like I say, EMI is what we thought initially,
Yeah.
and I don't believe it. So anyhow,
did you want to talk about the ultrasonic welds? I know that jumped out to you.
Yeah.
Nice lean design principles there.
Moving, yeah. So these MOSFETs.
Yep. Those are the power switching components. MOSFETs.
So MOSFETs in this case. There's another one called IGBTs, but anyway, this MOSFET here is bolted together, and you can see that you got the 3 phases, click, click, click. That's kind of like how this is put together. But what I like about this one is, first off, it's a single piece. It's not 3 lumps, but a single piece. And then we've got it laser welded at one end, done. This is I like this better than that. I got to fool around with 3 parts and 9 bolts. This one here, 1 part, and I'm all finished. And this will never break. I have a real problem with screws and electrical components, and the reason for that is because when you pass current through anything that looks like a threaded fastener, it has a tendency to want to undo itself. So in the case of, in many cases, what you do is you glue them in. You use Loctite, and you're basically gluing it because, quite frankly, they're not called threaded fasteners, they're called threaded unfasteners. It's got a 60-degree angle so you can get them apart. If you want them to stick together, yeah, you can't beat a laser. So I'm pretty happy to see, and I just noticed that these ones here are really well done. These are additives, so they're flattened out good forever. Yeah. So there's never going to be any problem with this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely reducing failure points, making it faster to put together, and
right.
like the propensity for error with this style of fastening for
Zero.
those is
It's
certainly less than it is here.
well,
right?
you can't make a mistake, because when you pass these things down, when you drop these 6 components over the top of the, hey, this one's got 9, this one's got 6. There we go. So there's even more good stuff going on here.
Sure,
I got to
sure.
check that out. Anyhow, what we're looking at here is that with this assembly, I can't make a mistake. It'll never come apart. And I think they're the same. We were debating whether we want to talk about this, but we think that these are silicon because they're from the rear, and we pretty sure that the ones in the front are going to be silicon carbide, which is like quite a bit more money for these components. But you can't tell them apart.
They
You have
package
to-
them the
yeah.
same. You really need to tear them apart to know
Yeah.
if they're silicon carbide or just silicon based. But yeah, they went from the Danfoss sort of 3 separate units to the single Infineon Drive G2 unit, sort of 3-in-1. We've seen that in other competitive vehicles. Certainly easier to put together, 1 piece versus 3. So
yeah, and I'm pretty sure that again, we go back to weight as one of the biggest issues associated with efficiency or mileage, whatever you want to call it. And you look at that, and you look at this, and in essence, they're the same thing. This one may be only doing a single motor, and this one's doing a dual motor, but there's not that much difference. And you can see that this little teeny tiny thing versus that plus the lid, you're looking at a lot of extra weight.
yeah, and I think for this entire drive unit versus this entire drive unit, the delta in weight was almost 30 kilos, slightly more. So more than 60 pounds, and you're doing that twice in the vehicle, right? So over 100 pounds of weight savings, and that all goes back to that thing we mentioned earlier about efficiency and doing more with fewer kilowatt hours, right? Or going farther with the same number of kilowatt hours. And I mean, I know that's always been Tesla's strategy. I know Ford has now doubled down on that. I've seen an interview where Doug Fields was talking about that, right? He was saying the boardroom solution is to double the amount of kilowatt hours in the battery pack, but the real way to do it efficiently is to make the vehicle lighter and more efficient so that you can do more with fewer.
And actually,
cells, right?
it's amazing. When you start talking about efficiencies, that's one of the reasons why we're trying to get to less latency, which means basically the amount of time it takes for the computers inside the vehicle to make their decisions. And again, edge connectors or going to flat diamond technology for circuit boards and stuff like that. All these things add minute amounts of time, if you like, but the efficiency goes up and the range goes up along with it. So I think, unless I'm mistaken, I think we've kind of covered
all the
everything.
areas. We should probably kind of tie a bow on it though, eh? So like, I guess in a summary perspective, we've said a lot of good things about this. We should, though, probably note it's not all necessarily roses and rainbows. There are some trade-offs with this, right? So you get a lot of advantage, reduced cost, reduced weight, but objectively speaking, from a performance perspective, it would be unfair not to note, you can still get the vehicle with a quad motor setup, or you can get dual motor, or you can get dual motor performance. With the quad motor setup, you got 835 horsepower. You go to the dual motor, it's 533 or 665 horsepower if you get the performance ones. So with that, you're seeing about 20% less horsepower, but still a heck of a lot of horsepower, competitively speaking.
Yeah.
Similarly with the torque across the range, if we assume that this is the performance dual motor, 908 foot-pounds of torque at the total vehicle level versus 829, so about 10% less there. And the 0 to 60 time goes from 3.1, or I've seen 3.0 seconds, to about 3.3 or 3.4. So still wicked fast, but about 10% less.
But at the end,
go
I
ahead.
drove the damn thing, and I'm telling you what, I will tell you that that Eric has told me he wants me to gun it. So, first we'll put it into gear, then we'll try gunning it. Well, it's got plenty of pep. I thought it was hugely fast.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody can really notice
Discern the difference,
0.3 of a second. I was very, very happy with it. Sue drove it as well, said it was like driving a cloud. Sue's got a very light foot, almost aggravatingly light. But at the end of the day, I definitely wanted to try this out. I think Rivian did more than just go to the dual motor on the car we had. I really, maybe it's because there was less weight or whatever, but we went over our little washboard road over here at Featherstone, and I was very impressed.
Yeah, we're
I
known
really
for
like this.
terrible roads that are double as endurance
Endurance,
off-road
places.
places.
That's good for us because we don't have to,
Don't have to go to the track. We just go out on the road
yeah.
outside of our
just
car.
just go down any old street. So at the end of the day, this has been a little, side-by-side analysis, and I think really and truly Rivian's moving in the right direction. As far as I'm concerned, if you're an automotive company, you should own your powertrain.
Yeah.
When you lose track of a few critical components, those things that make you stand out from the rest of the crowd, you start losing. So I'm very, very excited about what's going on here with Rivian.
Yeah.
I think they're doing the right thing. So I think we've, anything else we forgot?
No, I think you summed it up nicely. I mean, I share that same perspective. There are some compromises, but I think their typical driver, even seasoned drivers, probably aren't going to notice the difference. But depending on if you get the dual motor variant standard, it's $8,000 less than the quad motor, and if you bump up for the dual motor performance, you're still saving $3,000 over the quad motor setup. I think it's a little interesting what they did there. Like they're software limiting between the performance version and the regular dual motor version, I would suspect. So they're still sort of steering people towards the dual motor one. But yeah, there's definitely north of $1,000 of cost that is not in this vehicle. The customers seeing less of, seeing a reduced cost as a result. So it's good to see the savings getting passed along, man. It's
yeah. Well, actually, this if you're just going with the standard dual motor, you're looking at about $74,000, and that's what I paid for mine. And after owning it for a little while and finding out all the doodads that are in there, I don't know who tagged it for that number, and we tore it down and looked at it significantly. I would have probably pegged that at north of $100,000.
Sure.
And I think that, quite frankly, it's worth every penny. If you can get this car for $74,000, I can't imagine why you wouldn't. If you're the kind of person that I am, I can't imagine why you wouldn't jump on it. So
absolutely.
Anyhow, thanks for watching, and stay tuned. We'll be giving you more information on the quad versus dual at Rivian. There's some more technical things that are coming down the pike. Thanks very much, and we will be talking to you soon.
Thanks, Sandy.
Thanks.